as I was starting to say, I had committed to Bernard doing this, and I'm interested in doing, wanting to do it, and then the other product came along, and so that's why I'm doing it too. Long introduction, to not much point. The Woodstock Low Power Kit was covered in quite some detail by Jim, I think 2 years ago. This is about the connectivity kit, which has come out in the last year, and to my surprise, not too much fanfare. And I don't know if that's because there aren't as many people that have had ConnKits, WLPs made or not. But I'm going to go through the device itself first as a refresher of why a Woodstock would need to connect in any case. So there will be some overlap with what Jim covered a couple of years ago as a refresher. A review of Bernard Panomatic's kits. There's a wide variety of these kits, all of which are to replace, even though it doesn't have to be failed, but ostensibly to replace a failed ACT chip in Woodstock. And they range in functionality and price, so any aspect of that you need, he's got a kit for. The simple Acct Repair Kit basically just changes the old ACT chip or the replacement chip, and it acts and behave. Oh, dang. Missed my punchline. Get in on the act today, sorry.
That's a dad joke.
Yeah. And up until like 3 days ago, it's a catchy line here. The simplest is, for background, for those who don't remember, know, or care, the power circuit in the power supply inside the device is not well designed, and if you put the AC adapter on with no good solid battery inside, 99 out of 100 times it'll blow at least the ACT chip, sometimes others. So every day on eBay you can see Woodstock machines that say, no battery, and I plugged it in and it doesn't work. And probably 1 out of 3 I email and say, don't ever do that again. Never plug it in unless you know there's a battery. Most people ignore it, but a few others that probably are going to sell it again say thank you.
Which, by the way, is why Bernard did this.
Exactly.
He plugged his 2 in that he found in the drawer and blew the axe.
Ah, here's a good point. How many people amongst this elite educated crowd have actually done that? I did.
I read the manual.
I did. I'm the only one. Okay, I'm the only honest one, please.
For the 35 series and 80,
No, the classic series are fine.
then it can run an AC only with no battery.
You can use that as a hammer and it will work. Those machines are solid for anything. And the Spice series seem to be somewhat sensitive to the same kind of problems, but not as much. Basically, any Woodstock that you plug in, you can guarantee you'll fry it. So the point is, he makes a replacement chip just for the ACT chip. So if you want an HP25 to act exactly like the original HP25, he can put that in. And one of the things that we discovered accidentally, or not accidentally, but unintentionally, is that even though the book says it's not true, it is true that any ACT from any machine will work in any other machine. I sent him an ACT from an HP21, and he was able to bring a 29C back to life. So the good news, sorry?
The exception being the 27.
Yeah, you're right, different process.
And they're probably all like interchangeable on the Woodstock. There were the different HP part numbers for even the PMOS ACT that's used in most of those.
Mm-hmm.
There were some subtle differences, and some of them, according to HP, will not work correctly in 97. That's in the service manuals.
Bernard said from his research, a 21, which is somehow different in other ways, also shouldn't work in others. But I said I had a 21 that I just sent him, and we just said, you know, you can do theory all day long, but take the chip, move it, and see what happens. And the point of all that is, if you find a burned out 29C for $30, $40, $50 on eBay, you can get a 21 for the same amount and end up with a working 29 for a third of the cost of what they would otherwise go for. So that's the ACT Repair Kit is the sort of the entry level, and that's just replace the functionality of the original. The extended Acct version adds continuous memory to, oh, I'm sorry, one of the core things is, with most of these, except the first one, is it lets you emulate all the other machines, and I'll get to what all the other machines is in a minute. But this one brings all the other machines to it. Also, continuous memory. You can essentially chain programs up to 5,000 steps. So the 25 step, 29, 40, 49 and 98 step limits don't really apply. And there's a whole bunch of other features, many of which are also in the WLP. Yep.
So would this make a 25 and go to 25C?
Yes, yep, amongst other things, but it would also make it a 29C. And you can basically change, you know, the keys are different, so there are issues, but it essentially has the firmware of all the models. The advanced Acct version is an interesting product. Think of it as the lower cost version, and the upshot, and Bernard was very, if you read the website, he's very upfront about it. He basically ordered the wrong part, and instead of fighting with the vendor and sending them back, he just put a smaller feature set in it so that somebody can go in and it has a smaller set of features, but it's a way to get many of the features at a much lower cost. There's also IR modules so that you can print to the IR printer, and a GPS chip that can go in that can be sort of mix and match with, I believe, any of the versions except the advanced version, and that was because it was limited memory. There's also a very simple update kit for some of the scenarios that I was talking about. You can take, you can have a 21 and put one of the new chips in it and essentially repurpose it permanently to a 29C by putting in the different firmware, load a 29C set of firmware and a set of keyboard overlays like Eric has done for the others. So you can upgrade a cheap 21 to a much better machine if you like them. Like everyone kind of has always wanted to play with the 29C, but they were too expensive, etc. So basically the point here is that there's kits of all shapes and sizes and prices, so anything you want to do with a Woodstock, there's a kit for that. The king of all of these is the WLP, the Woodstock Low Power, and it brings all the features I'm going to talk about quickly by essentially replacing all the electronics. It's an entirely new board with modern electronics. The hardware side of it, Jim knows well and talked about, and if you don't have the slides from a couple of years ago, you can get them. And that's, I don't know, and no slur, I don't care that much about the chips and all that side of it. It just doesn't, not my thing. That picture on the upper right is the entire board. That's the entire system there. Some of the basic capabilities and features of it is that it provides you the ability to run any of the Woodstock models or the 67 or any of the Spice models or any of the classic models with the exception of the 65, and I'll talk about that in a bit. Some of its virtues, it's extremely low power. You can charge it and run it literally for weeks, which is one of the key problems, if you will, with using a Woodstock. I mean, they're great, we love how they feel, everyone loves the LED and all that, but just to, even if you get a mint condition one, if you do a calculation, leave it on the desk for a half hour without shutting it off, batteries are gone. With the new low power circuit, it's going to be weeks that way, and it does things like it can automatically go to sleep, but keep the LED on, so it's good power management, aggressive power management side. It has a real-time clock, so you have date, time, you can have alarms with a beep, and a stopwatch. Of course, it has the red LED display, but he has patiently and creatively recreated full alpha capability with the LEDs. Some characters of which you have to use a slight bit of imagination to see them as they are, but in context you don't. And by that I mean, for example, an M is up, over, and down, so it looks like the top of a square. It doesn't look like an M, but in the middle of a word, like PM, exactly. So like, you know, you wouldn't struggle to what is that. So, and there are several others like that, and there's some creative ones. Continuous memory, so everything's saved, the stack is saved, unlike the original machines in which not everything was saved, like the stack wasn't saved, things like that. Everything is saved, everything you do. One of the key advancements is it's safe to charge. You can charge the battery with this. You can just plug it in. You can actually run it without the battery in, but you shouldn't because of things that Jim could probably explain and understand well, and I don't. The performance, although not the goal, the performance by virtue of being on new silicon is it's 3 or 4 times faster. There's 512K flash in there, which is why we'll get into storage for user data, but it's one of the reasons why the firmware for all those other machines is in there. There's just an enormous amount of memory. And as I said, if this is interesting at all, go do, I went through Jim's slides again and it explained a lot of stuff. Some features, the left column are things that I like talking about because they're cool. The right column is more reasons why I would need a connectivity kit. It has program step mnemonics, so it's not 2539. You got to decode what that is. You can see in English what the step is. It has the function preview, like an HP41. You press the button, you hold it down, and it comes up and it says sign. It adds actual editing. The 25 and others don't really allow editing per se. You have to like delete and overwrite and add new commands, whereas the 2967 let you insert and delete commands, things of that nature. It goes to sleep when it's not in use, even if you leave the LED on, so the machine itself is powered down. There are commands that let you view. There's so much memory that I'll get to in a minute, so much user memory in there of different types that you actually need commands to go and see how many registers and sets and things of that nature, and there's functions built in for doing that. There's some bonus features, like you can see what temperature the machine is, you can see what the current battery voltage is, and there's some just cool category features. Everyone knows, anyone who's used a programmable Woodstock knows the flicker. When you run a program, you get that jittery, cool sort of flicker, which is cool and, you know, retro and all that. But also, it can be annoying because programs, particularly that are designed to pause and show you a number and continue, with all the flickering, you can miss it. So you have a user option to have the classic flicker or disable the flicker. Little subtle things like that bring a kind of a rich experience to it. It can tell you its name when it turns on, and that seems kind of stupid because you know what machine it is, right? It's your machine, but keep in mind that it can be set to be any firmware you want. So you might be picking up an HP25 that has 29C firmware in it, and you hit sign and it doesn't do sign. So it's to remind you what mode it's in, so to speak. And there's an Easter egg in there. How many people here have done an Woodstock upgrade? Any?
If anybody wants to see one,
Has everyone found the Easter egg?
it's beautiful.
Jim, have you found it? No? I'll take you on the
But I
sidebar.
bought it 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
Not this one. It's only a
No,
couple
not the
years.
low power one, I have the previous version.
Oh, you got to upgrade. Got to upgrade to the low power. So there's an Easter egg. I'll tell you what it is, but I won't tell you how. You have to figure out how. There are 250 quotes related to science, physics, astronomy, things that would resonate with this crowd. So if you're looking for an inspirational moment, you can invoke this function and get a little quote, many of which you'll immediately recognize, but some of which you don't, and they're interesting, and it provokes a little thought.
Nothing about Ruman and Joey?
No. Although I did ask the same question.
At least tell them it's a key sequence, you know, that
Should I reveal it?
it's up to you.
Oh, okay, I'll reveal it. So you hit Shift plus, right?
Let me do that again, because it's Shift.
Shift minus. Sorry, Shift minus.
And it scrolls across, and you can adjust the speed.
Wait a minute,
of the
which
scroll.
shift, Jeff?
Yellow.
Yellow.
There you go.
F shift, negative sign, minus sign.
And another quick thing to talk about that's not really discussed in the paperwork is there's 100 other features, but how do you do 100 other features? Most of these machines have used up the keyboard, right, with all assignments, F key and G key and things like that. Bernard added some very interesting things like F something does this, and F blue, and F blue yellow, but also some other smart things. The tests, X greater than 0 and so forth, they have no meaning in run mode. You know, they're not effective. So those keys are used for the other functions. So that essentially, even though the keyboard's full, you can still use those functions.
Do they normally work off the keyboard? You have two large numbers, and you want to compare them, not in program mode, you know?
Nope.
Even before? I mean,
Well, before what?
The normal Woodstock machine.
Oh, yeah, it'll move the program pointer.
I don't know if they worked in run. I don't think they worked on a Woodstock. I don't think they worked. Because what do you do?
I've used them on other machines, and they.
Later, 41 does.
Yeah,
I think the 41 was the first one that made them relevant, because the 41 could say yes. You know, X greater than Y, yes. But, you know, X less than 0, how do you respond?
Didn't it advance the program pointer?
Oh, in
Oh, like single step?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, but I'm just saying it from the keyboard. I
yeah.
don't believe so.
In run mode.
I don't think so, but, well, all of mine are upgraded.
No.
Anyone have a non-upgraded Woodstock?
I'll bet you a buck.
Roger, Joe wants to bet you a buck. Oh, by the way, on timing, button stop. On the stopwatch.
That's a hint. So the data that you can store in back, now this is sort of transitioning to why I need a connectivity kit. Each model has a certain number of registers. Can I do it right? A 25 has 10 registers, no, 20, 0 through 9 and dot 0 through dot 9. But the 29C adds more and so forth. So each model has its own register set that are built in, but for each model you can have 10 sets of register sets. So you can populate a bunch of registers that may be needed for a given program and save that set of registers as register set 1, and then have another set of registers for another program. And I'll get to in a minute, programs. So essentially you can write programs that have values needed for them in the registers, which wasn't typically done because we all have more than one program. This lets you essentially have sets of register data saved. And not only does each model have 10 sets, you also optionally can share them, which lets you do something like if you're doing some sort of program on a 25C and want to know, are the values, is it really the same on a 38C or something like that. So essentially you can globally share that same set of registers if you want. So more register data than you know what to do with. There are 100 constants, 20 of which are predefined, things like gravitational constant, speed of light, and things of that nature, but you can add another 80. Up to 100 saved programs, which you can save by number, but it's because there's alphanumerics, you can also save them by name. And there's a browser that lets you just essentially walk through the programs by name. So basically, it's not quite what's the same finesse as on a 41, but you can name all your programs and go and retrieve them and run them by name, select them by name. And of the 100, 10 are quick access. So essentially, you can do grecall 5 if you happen to remember, as opposed to grecall.05. So they're quicker access, so the ones you use most frequently are easier to access with fewer keystrokes. There's also 55 library programs for the HP 25 that came from the book, the applications book. 24 came from the applications book, and I think Battleship is a game he wrote that was added to that, if I remember right. Also, the 67 the standard pack programs, the ones that came on the cards that came with it, are also available. But again, you can store 100 other programs. So all this 10 sets of data, constants, and all this other stuff is a lot of data. And you know, heretofore there was nothing you could do except just type it all in. And if you happen to have a memory loss, which is even more unlikely now, whatever. So the idea is I want to be able to save that data. I also want to be able to get data into it without having to type it. And I want to perhaps share my programs. So an overview of the connectivity kit itself is it lets you manage the WLP, do things like check its version and what is the firmware number, and import programs and export programs, as we talked about yesterday. It also lets you examine the data that's in there because there's so many programs, you can basically go and look at the list of programs. You can't edit the data, and we'll see examples of all this. But it lets you see, there are sort of viewers, like editors without editing, for the data that's in there. There's also an emulator, everyone probably recalls, and in addition to these hardware kits, Bernard made Windows-based software emulators built around Nonpareil that provide each machine and all the features of each machine and so forth. So this is bringing these two together. You now have software-based emulation and hardware that's connected, and the next leap would be to do an ICE with it, right? Just create an ICE so you can run it remotely, and that's what this brings to it. It lets you have full machine language debugging, not RPN language debugging, full ACT level debugging that you can control from inside. The emulators, I'll get to it, but basically the emulators you can use standalone. So if you want, you can just run the emulator, just open the program, and I'll do that in a minute. Or you can actually connect by USB cable and remotely run your device from set breakpoints and stuff like that. The whole machine language debugging thing, I can't talk to in detail. I'm not, if God is kind and generous, I will never know ACT level assembler language stuff. But for those who are interested, you can and explore it in great detail, as we'll quickly see. But how do I connect to a Woodstock? Right? Woodstocks don't have any kind of connection. There's no serial ports, there's no USB ports, there's no anything on it. But the four dots in the upper left corner of the board were built in from the beginning, anticipating a USB connection. But the thing in the lower right that you see there is a typical USB chip. You can buy them off eBay or other places. They're inexpensive. They're pretty reliable. They're generally supported chipsets. It's amazing. You can get them for like $1 or $2 or something ridiculously cheap. But if you look at it, it's virtually the size of the board in a Woodstock. And anyone who's ever taken a Woodstock apart knows there's not a whole lot of room inside there to do anything. And you can see the photo on the bottom left. That was Bernard's prototype. You see on the right, there are four, I don't know, is it right to call those JTAG pins? Is that?
No, those are,
They're serial.
So it is USB, but somebody called it JTAG, and I don't think that was. But anyhow, but it's very inconvenient because if you know the form factor of a Woodstock,
So it's USB converted to RS-232, basically.
that one was?
This.
Oh, the chip, yeah, that thing does. But I think, yeah, I got a pointer. I'm lost. These here, I think, are USB. So essentially, you're connecting these to this.
But they are not USB, they are RS-232.
No, they're RS-232.
Yeah?
Yeah, you got RSTX.
Yeah.
Okay, I stand corrected.
that's what the chips do
Yeah.
on the USB thumb drive.
Well,
Converting.
so the point being, the initial prototype supported this, but it's not practical because if it's, hello?
Push the button.
Dang. If you look at this and you have a wire sticking directly out of the back, you can't put it down, you can't hold it, it's mechanically impractical to use. Once you're going to start doing some of the things we'll get to in a slide or two. So Bernard searched and searched, and there are some obvious, just put a USB thing inside and just put a connector, except that it's a space challenge. So what you see, his solution, always clever, is to take the core of the USB chip that we saw, take the connectors and the pins off, and run wires up this way to a USB micro connector wired right here. And this view here is looking into the bottom. So if you will, don't know if you can see it. You probably can't see it from there, but I'll show it. But the cable is going to plug in like that.
Batteries.
Hang on. This is standard micro USB cable. Like that.
Bob,
Yep.
could you hold it in the light of the projector? Thanks.
Ah.
Sorry. So this is just a standard micro USB off the shelf. The only non-standard aspect of it is it's very thin. The mechanical space is very thin, and cheap cables and even good cables, the thickness of the head shell is apparently subject to interpretation by manufacturers. So you may have to, I'm not touching it really.
It's the batteries.
Oh,
You may have to shave the plastic. It's just like an X-Acto knife, 30 seconds and that's it. So more by cleverness and patience, he was able to take pretty much standard inexpensive components and still get it into the Woodstock in a form factor that will let you plug in a standard cable. So you just plug it in the USB port, and you can see just the drawings to just show how there's the shot with the cable plugged in on top. Before,
is it turning off?
yeah, it's just turning off.
Green light goes off,
Yeah. Before I go on, I'm going to talk briefly, side trip here. The chipset inside, can I do this, is a prolific 2303 UA, whatever. What I thought, we spent months fighting what we thought was a Windows driver problem. There are many different versions of this driver out there, some of which will work on Windows 7, some of which will work on Windows 10, some of which will only work if you, even to run it, if you disable driver signing, the special way you boot up F8 and so forth. But after a lot of research, it turns out that it's not a Windows problem. Prolific disabled the drivers, and if you go into the device manager, it literally tells you, not clearly in English, get a new chip. So much searching late at night one night, even much later for Bernard, back and forth, a bunch of searching and Googling around found if you use version 2.3 or less, which is from 2008 or something like that, it's quite old, but it works fine on Windows 7, it works fine on Windows 10. If you use this old version, all of those problems go away. It connects every time, it doesn't have a problem detecting, you don't have to do driver signing or any of that kind of stuff. So, you know, after the show, he and I agreed we're gonna, make some notes or something and put something up on the board to note, because almost everyone who's played with these has had issues, and it doesn't always manifest the same way. The same driver version on different machines comes up with different things, but effectively it's Prolific saying, we want you to buy another chip. And in the world of USB serial cables that are $6, that's fine, you can get another one, but in the world of embedded devices, you obviously have no control over the chipset and ability to change it. Jim?
Says a word of warning, if you buy one of those USB to serial conversions, get one with an FTDI chip on it. I mean, those universally work all the time, every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and their driver is always available and it always works, so.
Yeah, but you don't have the choice here, right? For these things.
Yeah, you do. I mean, you can find them and they'll say contains the FTDI chip on it.
No, what I'm saying is what is inside these, what he's putting in these are the Prolific.
Oh, what Bernard's using.
Yeah.
If you have Bernard do the option, you do it yourself.
That was my same thing, and there were apparently mechanical issues with the chip that, the thing I showed before with the board is just a little bit too big or something. But the good news is the Prolific ones, we now have figured out what the deal is. So he can put those in, they're inexpensive, and they are reliable. Technically they're reliable. It's just a matter of you have to put a driver in that looks like it's ancient. So here's a quick overview of the UI of the ConnKit that I just split into sort of quadrants to just show there's sort of the admin. And when you open the app, that little part in the upper left called admin, when you open the app, that's all there was. In the initial versions of the machine, that was the UI. You could back it up and you could do a couple things. And so now literally when you open it, you see that little red square and you have to open the rest of it to expose the rest of the features. The lower left is a different tab structure for looking at the data, as I mentioned. The center panel is obviously the emulator interface. So if you're running the software-based emulator only, you're actually running the calculator, just like any of the other Windows calculators, by clicking the buttons on the calculator. And the right side is the control, emulation control, and the
Should we change the battery?
debugging features, maybe between sessions. And I'm just going to blast through these. They're in the, it's in the, and by the way, the software is available on Panamatic's website. There's no cost or anything. It's just download it and explore it. The admin side has all the things you'd expect. What is the version? How do I update? In terminology here, the firmware is in Flash, but what's called the firmware is just that, the microcode that the various machines run on, whereas what is called Flash is storage, even though technically it's all Flash. So you can update the firmware as new versions or features come out. You can also update the Flash. It also includes things like reset it back to factory condition and so forth. You can also do a full backup of the entire everything, my entire WLP. You can save programs and load programs, and I just have some screens here that you show. If you're going to save a program, first of all, in the text file it puts what machine it is, what program you've assigned it to, the program number, recall 100 or what have you. And there's just a few lines just to show you when you export it, it'll put line numbers 1 through N, but they're not needed, but it puts them in there as a courtesy for you because it's easier obviously to maintain and understand. If you're going to import a program, it's a freer format. You don't have to, it doesn't use the line numbers, which in some ways is a good thing because if you have a program that you've written a text editor with a bunch of line numbers and you have to go insert a number, you don't have to go renumber everything, things of that nature. These are the tabs, not going to dwell on this much, but just basically different tabs to show you the data. In particular, this one, you have all your programs in there. All the programs in there that you've named, you can just go look and see which one, and for some reason I decided I'm going to save my program as number 37, and 2 days from now I don't remember what number, and so you can just look at it, and the rest of it is the same sort of thing. It's sort of look. The only thing that really is input is this set of controls, and these are options, different things you can do. You can have US time, international time, other things, long awake, which is to keep it awake so it doesn't go asleep while you're on the ConnKit, things of that nature. This area, you're seeing the calculator, which again, you can run just the software. You don't need a device in your hand. You can just fire it up and run it up and use a different machine, select your machine, and it will do all the calculations, and it's running the same firmware again. You can see in the upper right some of the controls for running the emulation. There's different states and things of that nature I'll talk about in a second. You can, if you do have a device connected, however, you can run the device. You can run the calculations from the device or from clicking on the buttons on the screen, but practically speaking, do the math on the calculator and run the emulation and the debugging on the PC screen. But you can do both on the PC screen, or again, if it's standalone, if you're just doing that. For example, if you have a 25 and you're debugging whatever, but you're just curious, how does the 33 do this or what have you, you can just change modes to another one to explore it. For debugging, again, it's all machine language. All of the ACT registers are here. You can see all the registers and all the selects for the fields and so forth. And it has a feature so that as the registers, as you single step, and you see the register state change, whenever the contents of a register change, it also does a color change to sort of, catch your eye and pull you so you can see it when you're doing that. What else? The 3 modes, run mode is basically the calculator's running. The calculator's running and you just use it as you would. There's also stop mode that lets you then single step through so you can explore it. Single step from a RPN perspective, multi-step from a machine language. And Animate Mode lets you basically, it's like single step, but what you do is you see the machine language instructions like 1 per second. So you're like, well, what happens when I do this? And you can see it go dump, bump, bump, bump as it steps through. So it's a good way to learn what's actually happening. And as you're doing it, you have the option to, oops. You have that. This is annoying. Is it annoying for you too?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. As long as all of us, it's okay. There's a code window and a data window that you can open up, and as you execute, you know, these are the machine instructions, and as you execute, the highlight steps through. You also have the option, if you want, which is an interesting feature, the comments, so to speak, of what the instructions are doing is just a text file, so you can change the text file to correspond with, if you think how he chose to describe that function is not what you would do, you can change it. These aren't comments in the sense of the larger program and what it's doing. It's more comments in what the machine instruction is doing. So it's an interesting feature. I've never seen a way of changing documentation of what the instructions are. You can set a breakpoint on address or the instruction, the viewers, so forth. There's also, oops. Here, this show operator button basically reveals a Bernard control panel, which is the features that he uses to prepare the device, things like to put the serial number in and so forth. So it's essentially exposing everything that you can do to the machine, but the ones that could harm it, not in a permanent way, but from a configuration sense, the ones that can harm it are locked out by a password. He's happy to give it to you, but it's just to save you from yourself. My advice, though, is talk to him. It's not completely intuitive, you know, the little labels in the fields. The manual does cover some of it, but there's a lot of things you can do to easily get yourself in trouble. So, he encourages you to play with it and so forth, but ask first. Just say, is this really what I do to do that, and whatever. He'll give you the password. So, TLDR, what does all this come down to, and why are we even talking about it? I tried to just kind of get some action words. It lets you fix your Woodstock. His kits allow you to fix your Woodstock. It lets you ignore it because of the super low power. You can treat it like you would treat a modern calculator, which is not worry about turning it off and doing this or that. You can just do a calculation and set it aside and come back with it in an hour and not fear that you've blown the batteries. It lets you jump in and look inside of it, the registers, and understand a little bit more of how it works. And if you're patient and have the skills to understand it, get a much more significant appreciation of what went into making the machines with the limited resources and stuff that they had. You can communicate with the Woodstock to move data back and forth. You can back it up so you can save your data. You can also learn another one. I mean, most of us have one or two that we know. We may own 5, but there's one or two, like in my case, the 25 was my first, and so that's the one I think in terms of. But it lets you then go explore other machines. Again, all of the SPICE models are there as well, all of the Woodstock models, 67. So I kind of sum this up by saying, ultimately, altogether, this lets you use your Woodstock comfortably like you would a modern calculator. You don't have to worry about frying it if you plug it in. You don't have to worry about turning it off every 5 seconds. You don't have to worry about all my data is lost because I can back it up. It sort of addresses the key things that make using a vintage calculator irrelevant. It's just like a current calculator. So my advice is get one. You have to go out then, right? My advice is pick up a Woodstock, use it again, you'll really enjoy it. In many ways, the 25 for me, the 25, but for a lot of us, the Woodstock was the first machine we had, and they still just have that comfortable feel that hasn't quite, in my opinion, been matched ever since. They just don't feel the same in the hand and so forth. Certainly they're more powerful and more memory and blah, 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 but there's just something cool to me about the way they feel. I wanted to thank some people, obviously Bernard, first and foremost, for, as I said, unbelievable innovation, commitment. And I can document pretty clearly that he's a very, very, very patient man with people asking stupid questions. Some of which he insists aren't stupid, but I know better. He's just a kind person as well. HP, of course, for my first electronic love, the 25 that I had, which I'd kill to have the same machine, literally the same machine today, but it's long gone. Eric for his initial groundwork in taking these kind of, having the vision to see what may be done with these things, and you know, the metaphor of I see because I'm standing on the giants, the shoulders of giants. He's one of the giants that really enabled many of these product sort of things, and in my opinion, doesn't get enough recognition for what he's done. He's been very generous and very kind, and absolutely. It's enabled a whole bunch of other people to make products that have made our lives better and happier, and it's just one of those core initial contributions that doesn't get recognized enough. And oddly enough, though my bank doesn't, I'm thanking eBay. Because Woodstocks are not things that you're going to find most often. You're not going to find at a flea market or other things, because they look sufficiently old and dingy and four-banger-like that most of them get tossed. eBay at least provides you a method to buy them, most of which, with good intentions, the seller plugged in to see if it works and cooked it, but now there's an answer to that. So eBay makes them available. They can be relatively cheaply restored and brought up to speed to do these kind of things. So that's all I had to say about that. Again, if this interests you even a little, see Jim's talk from a couple of years ago. Excuse me, it's much more technical, but I just wanted to increase the awareness of the WLP ConnKit, and if you have one, get it and do it. Any questions? Yep.
Is it applicable to the 19C?
I'm sorry?
Is it applicable to the 19C?
Good question. I believe so.
The low power on the 19C, Bob?
Yep.
The Acct will also do the 19C, the Acct Repair Kit specifically. Since it's in this.
It wasn't mentioned, it's not even mentioned on the site.
No, but the Acct, simple Acct Repair Kit is mentioned on the site for the 19C.
But not the 10. Not that anyone really has any idea to run a 10. It's the oddest machine they ever made, probably. But thanks, Jeff.
The 10 has a single chip in it that has the processor and the memory and the printer drivers and everything all in one. And probably what's inside it is equivalent to an Acct, but there's no way to split that out.
It's so odd that all that effort went into making a yucky machine. It's just bad in every way. And if anyone knows how to fix the printer in a 10, I'd like to see you in a sidebar after this meeting. Jim.
I just want to add one other comment.
Please.
You may have covered this. In fact, Bernard sent me this a long time ago when I was having trouble with one he modified for me for the 25, and I was able to diagnose it and troubleshoot it. But the nice thing is when you connect to it, it'll tell you in a window, you're connected or you're not connected. So it's a nice.
I'm sorry.
So it's a nice screen. You may have covered that already.
I didn't, but I'm glad you reminded me that I didn't.
Yeah, it's a really nice, because I was having trouble with my cable and having the cable connected, because, when you start making cables,
Hang on.
sometimes getting some disconnected things. So I didn't have a nice USB insert in the line. Mine was just a RS-232 connection on it, so. But it's a beautiful user interface. Bernard goes beyond what most of us mortals can do.
And then doesn't promote himself enough, which is why I'm here. So I have the software running, I just plug USB port in. Come on. Oops, wrong machine. Come on. Oh, it's all hooked up. Okay. Oh, it's gonna fight with me.
I need to install the driver first.
I
That's
did.
Windows.
Yeah, it's
For
Windows.
me, Unix. So,
Go with Unix.
Yeah, but there's so few Unix users, they don't make drivers for it. Just a minute.
Yeah. Windows is easy.
Yeah, once you get past the driver issue, it works really nice.
And the problem with each time you use another USB port is reinstalled.
It's different.
It's a different instance.
Yes.
And you know, you have a hidden key that you can put in as a global variable, that when you go into the device manager, you say view hidden device, and it will show you all the hidden device, and then you are, if you have plugged a lot of devices, you see all those devices there.
Oh, I can't believe this.
It looks like what I did.
Many hours of my life when it's ensuring this does not happen. But things have, you know what, all this other stuff we've been, okay, I'm not gonna waste any more of your time.
Out of the box demos never work.
Yeah, I'm not gonna waste your time trying and fighting with it. But the issue is not related. Oddly, the issue has nothing to do with the device. It's all to do with the driver configuration on here. But Jim's point is exactly that. Because the machine, there's no your connected window or anything like that on here, right? Oops, those slides. You just get the status down here. And as I said, it just opens up as this small part here, but you're just going to extend this out. So a quick demo of the emulator. Somebody pick a model. 65 and 01 are available in the emulator, but they're not available in firmware in the machine because of, not because of technical capability or anything, simply because of space for the firmware. But I can do a 65 here and run, and so now I'm a 65. 600 divided by 29 is 193.9. I have no idea why those numbers are important, but I know them. So you can, you know, it's an emulator, and you can do whatever. And so some of the mode things I talked about, give me a second. If I animate, if I now just hit the number, you see in the Acct register is changing, and the stack, and the program counter. And if I start doing things over here, it's slow because it's playing the machine instructions at 1 per second. But it gives you it's very interesting. It gives you a unique perspective on hitting one number, one digit on the machine is 100 instructions and what it's doing and so forth. So it's a black hole. It can pull you in and suck you down, and you know, like hours later, oh, okay, that's what that is. Sorry, so Jim, I'm sorry, I may have jumped into the middle of what you were saying.
No, that's it. I just wanted to point out it has a nice diagnostic interface to it, so you can tell what it's connected. My cable was kind of flaky, so I played with it for a while.
John?
I did just a real quick look at his website. I can't tell from the website. Does the kit, does it come with the calculator, or do I need to send him a calculator, or how's the?
So, it's a good question, and I'm sorry I didn't even address it. What he sells is a kit, a hardware kit. You have a calculator from somewhere, you buy the kit from him, ostensibly with enough skills to do that kind of work. Some of us are challenged in that area, so some of us chose different forms of bribery to have him do it. I paid him with calculators, which at the time he needed, and so it was a mutually beneficial thing. I don't think that's a sustainable model. Last I heard, he had 20-something HP 25s. But there are other people, Jim, oh, did I say that out loud? That might have the skills for doing those kind of things if you don't. And people tell me, and I'm not in a position to judge, but people tell me that from a skills perspective, this is on the lower side of being super skilled. You know, it's not super, I mean, the WLP is different because you're replacing the entire board as opposed to just replacing the chip. But if it's just the chip thing, it's supposedly straightforward. Anything else?
Yeah, the connectivity kit only the USB plug, USB to serial plug.
What about it?
Is the connectivity kit only the USB to serial plug? Or does it have more to it?
No. The connectivity kit, his perspective is those are off-the-shelf components and you can do that. The board is ready. In other words, you buy the board from him, you buy the little chip module thing that I showed, and you take it apart and build it with that.
So, but if I don't want to use bloody, but I want to use FTDI.
Correct.
If I buy FTDI to serial and then remove the USB type A connector and then do the stuff, I will have the same thing as the connectivity kit.
Correct. The pins,
Yeah, that's what
I think the way to say it is the pins on the board are for serial connection.
Yes.
Yeah,
The board is ready for serial connection, so you can put any kind of USB to serial and then connect onto the board that you want.
What I'm assuming from what I'm seeing is that he has removed the type A connector, put some wires and then.
Correct,
okay.
correct.
Yeah,
Right.
you took off the type A,
Yeah.
and took off the right angle 100 mil pin.
Yeah, so it's, from that perspective, it's strictly mechanical, but you can do it with anything you want. You could run serial lines if you really wanted to do it at that level, because it's a serial interface on the board.
Yeah, you can do that and just run serial, that's in fact, when he had those
Yeah.
4 pins, actually there's 3 pins and one that he filled
Just
in
a
with
key.
glue to key
Yeah,
it.
that's a key one,
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else? No? Okay, thanks a lot.
Good idea.